Hi, my name's Penny, and today I wanted to talk about the books that I read in February. Now, technically, there are still 2 days left of the month, but I've come to accept that I'm not going to finish anything else in that time because I'm going camping. Because there's not much time left in summer, so we've got to take advantage of it. So I did already do a mid-month wrap-up where I talked about the 10 books that I read in the first half of the month. I'm not going to go into those again, but I will link that video somewhere if you want to check that out. So second half of the month, the first thing I read was From a High Tower by Lackey. So this is the 10th book in a series of fairy tale retellings, but they're all set in a world where there are these elemental masters with different elemental powers. It's also mostly set in Europe, I think around the time of the First World War. The last couple of books have been set in Germany. This one is a retelling of Rapunzel, hence we've got Rapunzel here with her long braids. But again, Lackey did what she did in the last one, which is really the first couple of chapters are close-ish to being retellings, and then after that she just goes off into some kind of day-to-day life explanation based on all of her historical research, as far as I can tell. So this one, our main character Gazelle goes off and joins like a rodeo show because there's these Americans that have come over. She joins their show. For most of the time there's no real bad guy. Of course, in the last chapter we fight the bad guys that suddenly come along, but most of the time not much is really happening. There's not much conflict. And also, Gazelle ends up with the most boringest man in the world, even though I was totally shipping her with Rosa from the previous book. So, even though the series is going to continue, I believe from this point it's going to be like Sherlock retellings. So, based on my sister's suggestion, I've decided to just treat this as the last book in the series so that I can tick it off the list. This is actually my sister's book, so I'll be giving that back to her. The beginning of the series was really wonderful, but the last few books, not so much. So then the next book that I read was a really short one, and that is If Wishes Were Horses by Yann McCaffrey. It's actually even, like, it's a tiny little book, and it's really short, but it's even shorter than it seems because the second part is like this much of the book. It still looks like hardly anything, but this much is just a sample chapter of some other thing. So it's a really short little story. The text is pretty big. It's a tiny little book. Not much really happens, but it was an okay little story considering how short it was. We basically follow this girl and her family after her father has gone off to war and most of the men have gone off to war, and they're having to deal with staying at home and keeping everybody fed and looked after even when the city burns down. And as well, there's a little touch of magic in that her mother seems to be able to do something. Not really clear what, and maybe the main character of the story can do it too. The title is all based around the fact that when they turn 16, her brother has been hoping to get a horse. Does he get one? You'll have to read it. I gave it 3 stars. It was just an okay little story. I would have liked to have found out a little bit more about the magic in the world, but in this short story, I guess Yann McCaffrey couldn't do that, and it's possible the reason why she did that is because she didn't really have an idea of how it might work. Oh, so I should say that this I read because it was the shortest book on my physical TBR, and I also had put on my TBR that I was going to read the longest book on my physical TBR. Well, you see, it's got the bookmark in. I started it. I'm like 20 pages in, so like that's like 661 pages. So this is going to be a no, I didn't make it. That's a shame. I'm also not really enjoying it so far. Then the next books I have here are books from my physical TBR that were the lowest rated and highest rated on Goodreads. So the lowest rated one was the next one I read, and that is Almost Moon by Alice Sebold. So Alice Sebold wrote the Lovely Bones book. So I can see why this has really low ratings. We've got this really unlikable character. The very first line tells you why you might not like her. It is, when all is said and done, killing my mother came easily. So she's not a very likable character. She does some things that are really not very good. And the narrative is all over the place. So it's telling the story of how she's killed her mother and like dealing with the consequences of that, but it also jumps back all the time into her different memories about her mother and struggling with her mother's mental illnesses and the difficulties of growing up, and it jumps around all over the place through the memories. It's never really clear where you're at. It's kind of like just her train of thought, and so as she remembers things, she might jump to different memories within a single chapter all over the place. That said, I still rated this 3 stars because I didn't think it was that bad. Now, it might be just because I knew it was the lowest rated, so I had really low expectations going in, and so it was easy for it to meet those expectations. I don't know, I thought it was interesting seeing how you might get to the point where killing your mother seemed like a reasonable action. I don't think that it was ever justified. Like, she's clearly a flawed character, but I still think it was an interesting story, and I didn't mind the way that the story was revealed, even though sometimes it was a bit confusing. I mean, I'm not saying it was a good book by any means. It's only a 3 stars. It's like, meh, alright, not bad. But I didn't think it was terrible, so what a surprise. Then I read the highest rated book on my physical TBR, and that was Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. I was very concerned going into this book because there has been so much hype around it. And I felt for sure it was going to be one of those books where everyone raves about it and I read it and I just think, oh, not for me. But that was not what happened. This story is beautiful. I love the storytelling vibe throughout the book. I will admit that there was a bit kind of, you can see I even tabbed it, which I haven't done much lately, but this one there were some beautiful lines. I had to tab it. But there was a section right when like the big conflict's happening and the 2 main characters should be working together to help resolve it, and instead we've got chapters and chapters of them kissing. I was like, guys, maybe you could focus on the problem at hand. But other than that, I do understand why that was important to the story, and then it came together and it redeemed itself. The ending, I don't know how those of you who read this when this first came out dealt with waiting for the second book to come out. I have requested mine from the library straight away, even though I probably will also buy Muse of Nightmares, but I know that I can get it quicker from the library than I can by purchasing it. The joys of living in New Zealand. This was just a beautiful story. You've probably heard about it because there's been so much hype, but if you haven't, we follow a guy named Laszlo Strange, also known as Strange the Dreamer, and he has always been interested in this land called Weep, or at least it wasn't called Weep when he first learned about it, but at some point the name got stolen away, and whenever anyone tries to think of the name now or any places it was written down, now instead the name comes out as Weep. So then some people come out of Weep, they need help with solving the problem that has been happening in Weep. You don't know what it is for quite a long time into the book. They need help with the problem, and so Laszlo manages to get himself involved in that because of all his studying that he has been doing. But there are also some other really cool characters, some of the ones from Weep, also some of the other ones in the library. Laszlo is like a librarian. It does really take its time telling the story, but something is always happening and it's always revealing something. So I don't think that, like some of these other books that I've read are definitely slower in a painful kind of way, but this one I thought was slow in a beautiful, interesting way, except for the kissing scenes. Kissing scenes, not for me. Okay, so that was all the physical books. Now let's talk about audiobooks. I also listened to 3 more audiobooks in the second half of the month. The first one I listened to was Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson. So this is a companion series to Mary E. Pearson's original Remnant Chronicles. The Remnant Chronicles had a really interesting premise, but it was also a story about different realms coming together and finding a way to resolve their differences. So Dance of Thieves is essentially the same story. We've got this rebel girl. She has, in this case, been sent on a quest by the Queen to go and investigate a particular criminal, try and track him down in this other realm where our other main character, the guy of the story, is becoming the king type character. But what Mary E. Pearson's really good at doing is taking two good characters, but because of things they don't know, even though they end up caring about each other, they are at odds with each other, and it's a difficult situation to try and resolve. So this was a 3 stars just because it was okay. I mean, I enjoyed it while I was reading it, but I'm not particularly invested. This is meant to be the first book in a story, and I'm not particularly invested in hearing the rest of the story because I feel like I already know it's going to be a happy ending eventually. But I probably will read the rest because it was enjoyable enough while I was listening to it. But again, it's one of these ones where I'm glad I listened to it on audiobook because I think I would have been bored listening to it on physical. Then the next audiobook I listened to was Life of Pi, and I'm holding this up because even though I listened to the audiobook from my library, this is off my physical TBR. So now that I listen to the audiobook, I can tick this off my physical TBR. And again, I'm really glad I listened to the audiobook because I didn't really like this. I'm not really sure. In the beginning, it starts out with the author like doing, it is the author's note. It's different. It's easier to see in the physical version that this is actually his story, whereas in the audiobook, I wasn't really sure whether it was the true author saying something or whether it was a fictional author's note. But at the very beginning, he talks about how his last book before this didn't sell. And when I was listening to the first 5 hours of the audiobook and nothing happened, and it was just train of thought nonsense about zoos and animals and religion, which I'm not religious, so that aspect of the story annoyed me. It was just rambling, and I was like, no wonder your first book didn't sell if it was this. I could probably say the only reason this sold is because the idea of a guy being stuck with a tiger in a lifeboat is kind of cool, and you get cool imagery like this. And I haven't seen the movie. I don't really know how they could have made that movie interesting. I don't know why this is the winner of the Man Booker Prize, because I just thought it was rambly. It did get interesting for a little bit when he finally got stuck with the tiger in the boat, but then he rambled a lot more. Yeah, I didn't like it. I didn't really think it was much of a story. Then I read one last audiobook, and this audiobook is kind of a funny one because this is what I read. So this is Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb, which is the second book in the Farseer trilogy. So I had read the first book of the trilogy in the first half of the month, and I really wanted to get the second book, but for some reason, even though there was no wait on the first book, the second book had a 26-week wait at the library for the next audiobook, and I was not willing to wait 26 weeks. So I came up with a solution. I discovered that my library had the audiobook in CD form, and there was no wait for that. So I requested it, and I got it, and it's hilarious because it's massive. And then it's 24 CDs, because what I was thinking is that, and when I get the CDs, then I'll just rip them and I'll listen to it on my phone instead. But it's 24 CDs, so I did not do that. I had to listen to it on my stereo, which meant it took me a lot longer to read, because normally I just listen to audiobooks when I'm walking places, and it's multitasking. It's a good way to get things done. But this, I did listen to it when I was doing housework. It wasn't that bad. But I had to keep changing the CDs over all the time. It is a long audiobook. It is about 30 hours. And I do quite enjoy this world. I find the main character Fitz to be quite an enjoyable character. So Fitz is the bastard son of the king in waiting, and he also has both the ability to mind meld with animals and also the skill, which is the ability to connect with other people's minds, although he's not very good at that. And basically he's trying to help his kingdom through a really rough time. Monarchy is really struggling, both because they're just useless and also because there are these raiders coming at their shores and they're really struggling to battle against them. And there's this whole mystery where they tend to like repel people's souls or something, make them into like mindless people. I do really like the audiobook narrator. I think he does a really amazing job. So I will be listening to the third book. I had hoped to get to it this month, but I only just finished this one this morning, so I have run out of time. But I will definitely get to it next month because I already have it out from the library. So let's summarize the month briefly in terms of stats. So from the library, I borrowed 5 physical books and 7 audiobooks. And then from the books that I actually owned, I read 4 of them. However, 2 of those library audiobooks were also physical books that I owned. Oh, and I also did borrow 1 book from my sister. So, what I said before was that I wanted to try and read 8 books off my physical TBR if I could. Now, you'll see that I actually only read 6. I mean, I'm really close. No, I'm not. I'm only 20 pages into reading the 7th one. I did also start listening to the audiobook of All the Crooked Saints by Maggie Stiefvater because I thought maybe I could listen to the audiobook instead of reading it. And like, I really loved the audiobooks of The Wolves of Mercy Falls and The Raven Cycle, so I thought there was a good chance this audiobook would be good. I think it is, but I don't think it's the right way to read the story for the first time because there are just so many characters that I was really struggling to keep track of them all. Just because when you read the name, you kind of have that name in your head, but when you hear it, I don't know. I was losing track of characters, so I've decided I'm going to read it in physical instead. So I've decided since I didn't hit my goal of 8, I'm going to have to unhaul 2 books from my physical TBR. And I found some that I'm going to do. I'm going to get rid of A Corner's Children by Anne McCaffrey and Elizabeth Ann Scarborough. So this is like the 12th book in the series or something ridiculous. I did read some A Corner stories a long time ago. This is like a story of this girl with a unicorn horn and she discovers this whole race of other people with it. I don't know. The other books that I read in the series I read a long time ago, but I didn't read enough to get anywhere near the 12th book. So I'm going to get rid of this for now because I'm not going to read it this year, which is very unrealistic. The other book I'm going to get rid of is Conrad's Fate by Diana Wynne Jones. So this book, I thought it was like a standalone or a first book, but I've since discovered that some people consider it to be the first book of the series, but it's also like the 5th book in the series. I don't know, it's really confusing. I think I might like to read the series at some point in the future, but I don't think it's this year. I don't think I need to own this book. So I'm going to get rid of these 2 books, and that means that my physical TBR is now down to 100 books. So we're winning. So those are all the books that I read this month. I'm sure a lot of you won't be surprised here that my favorite would have to be Strange the Dreamer. It was great. So if you have read any of the books that I talked about today, I would love to talk to you about them down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.